I'm about to show you the most boring business model ever, but has over a 95% success rate over a 5-year period. Unlike real estate, Airbnb, or rental properties that all require you to gamble on something that may or may not work, this business model is nearly foolproof. Well, you may ask, how is that possible? Because it involves you stepping in on an already profitable business that's been around for 20 plus years, and you're getting paid for simply keeping your hand on the steering wheel. And you can do this without even having any direct business experience. As someone who's been able to do this 6 times over and makes over $850K in yearly cash flow, I'm going to dive deeper into this stupid, simple business model, how it works, how to get started, and what kind of results you can expect after 1 year of doing this. So what I'm talking about here is small business acquisition. Typically, when someone says small business acquisition, we're talking about a market that is sub $10 million in value. And why is that important? It's because private equity groups and other institutions, they don't care about sub $10 million deals because they have to pay their investors. And there's not enough cash flow on those deals to do that. So this leaves a whole segment of the market where there is nobody to buy them. Take that and pair it with that over 75 million baby boomers are going to be retiring over the next decade. Baby boomers own 1/3 of all small businesses. That's 13 million of them. 13 million businesses represents $15 trillion in value that needs to exchange hands. Now this is how it's going to play out. 1/3 of those businesses, of the 13 million, are going to go to that baby boomer's son or daughter to run. Another third are going to be put onto the market for someone like myself or my students to go out and try to acquire. And another third are going to try to sell, but they're going to fail and they're going to end up closing the doors even though they have a profitable business. So what does this tell us? It tells us that we are in a buyer's market. There is way more supply than there is demand. And all that we need to do is figure out the strategy to find the right deals, make sure that they're making the money that they say they're making, and how to acquire them and not run the day-to-day ourselves. Those are the 3 things that we need to do in order to be successful in this. One of the best things about these boomer type businesses is that these businesses on average are over 20 years old. So they've been doing 20 years worth of cash flow, 20 years worth of revenues, 20 years worth of making a product or a service, and 20 years of managing a team. You are acquiring an already existing workable product that will continue to work after your acquisition without you having to change anything. One of the key things to realize is the success rate of a business acquisition versus a startup. Now, a startup has over a 95% chance of failure in the first 5 years. This is what we call kind of the crucible period for most small businesses when they get started. If you can make it past 5 years, you're going to make it as a business. Well, all the businesses that we are looking at are businesses that are well over 5 years, many times over 20 years. Not only have they passed the crucible of the initial startup phase, they have gone through recessions, they have gone through ups and downs in their industries, they have gone through new regulations and new laws, and yet they still stand here today profitable. Business acquisition as a strategy has a 95% success rate after 5 years. So this means after I found this 20-year-old business and I've acquired it, I've owned it now for 5 years, that population has over a 95% success rate. If we're looking at this in terms of a risk-adjusted return, you're looking at making 6 figures a year from your first acquisition. Oh, and by the way, you have over a 95% chance to make it for the next 5 years with that new acquisition. Looking at it that way, the answer is clear. Business acquisition is the way to build generational wealth. One of the important things to realize as well is that business acquisition's been around for hundreds of years. This strategy is not a gimmick. It's not a fad. It's not something that just got created last week and every influencer on the market is talking about and how they're making millions of dollars from it. This is something that's been around since businesses have been around. You have different models like Airbnb arbitrage, where the market turns and all of a sudden that arbitrage that you were relying upon to make a profit is gone. You're relying upon Airbnb to continue to exist. You're also relying upon the landlord who's making you the tenant and signing an agreement with you that allows you to use that apartment to be able to list on Airbnb so that you can make the money on the arbitrage. There's too many factors in that model where if you pull one block out, the whole tower is going to crumble. Same thing happens when you look at different models like going out and flipping homes. Flipping homes is great. It's been around forever. But what is it relying upon? It's relying upon you being able to go out there, find a house under value, be able to take that house, put some money into it, turn it right around, and sell it as quickly as possible. Well, guess what 2 things affect that? One, interest rates, which right now are at 30-year highs. And the second is inventory, which is at 30-year lows. So now try to go and do that business model and see if you're going to be making the same money today as you were going to be making 10 years ago. So when we're looking at the different opportunities out there, you want to look at something that has longevity. You want something to look at what has demographics in your favor. Part of that argument is knowing that 75 million people are going to be of an age where they can no longer work and they have over $15 trillion worth of value in their businesses that they need to move on. They want to sell, they want to get out of it, and that is where you and that is where I come in, knowing how to do that and find the best ones so that we can build up our portfolio cash flowing businesses and build generational wealth. In our strategy, we are going after bland businesses, boring, low risk, achievable, non-volatile, and differentiated creative businesses. And these are typically what we're finding when a boomer is selling their boring business. Now, your next question is, how do I get started down this path of business acquisition? And there's a couple things that you need to make sure that you qualify in order to make this something that you can achieve in the next 6 to 12 months. The first thing you need to have is experience. There is no lender out there who is going to give an 18-year-old a $2 million business loan to acquire a business. It's nothing against 18-year-olds. It's just that they don't have the experience necessary to give that lender confidence that once they give you the money, you're going to make this business better. So let's now look forward. You need at least 5 to 10 years of work experience. Now, that work could be in anything that's in sales, marketing, operations. You don't need to have business ownership experience. What you do need to have is a skill that can make a business better. Now, almost all jobs out there fall under the category of sales, marketing, or operations. So then once you're able to have that level of experience, now you need to learn how to craft your narrative. Now, what I mean by craft your narrative is, how do you tell your story to the people that are going to be in the buy process? That is going to be your lender, that is going to be the broker, that is going to be the seller, and that is going to be any investor who decides to throw money alongside of you in order to get your deal done. You need to come up with the narrative of why you're the best person to do this. Part of that comes from taking your experience, whether that be in sales, operations, or marketing, and putting it together with what you are planning on doing with this specific business to make it better in the future. One of the reasons why building a narrative is so important is because one of the most essential tasks that you need to do in the acquisition process is gain the trust of the seller. Now, many times these sellers, they've owned this business for 20, 30. We've even looked at deals where the business has been around for over 50 plus years, and now they are passing this business on. After their family, this is probably the second thing in their life that means the most to them. It's provided for their family for their entire lives. It's put their kids through college. They have people who work for them that they see as their sons and daughters. It is very important to them, and it is a very emotional process. Obviously, at the end of the day, the business needs to make sense numbers-wise. It needs to be making the amount of cash flow to make it worth your while. It needs to be making sure that you're going to be making debt service coverage ratio, which covers the loan that you're taking on to buy it. All those are super important. But at the end of the day, if you don't build a relationship with that seller that will enable them to trust you, they're going to leave this business in better hands, then the deal is never going to happen. So when you create this narrative, we want this story to be not only your experience, but also why you are going to be a partner as well as the next best thing to happen to this business since the owner founded it. Another reason why building rapport with the seller is so important is it opens the door to creative financing. One of the most popular ways in which to finance business acquisitions is something called seller financing. That is where the seller is giving you, the buyer, a loan of buying their own company. Now, there's no bank involved. There's nothing except for you and that seller sitting at a table and agreeing to how much you're going to pay them, how often, and with what interest rate. And that is just between you and the seller. Now, at the end of the day, the seller has to really trust that you know what you're doing and that you're going to pay him those payments over the course of 3 years, 5 years, it could be over 10 years, and that he knows that he is going to make that money back. And so when you build rapport with the seller, when you build that trust, you allow that seller to start thinking of different ways to finance this deal that would also be more beneficial for you, the buyer. Now let's talk about the SBA 7A loan program. As I mentioned before, part of the reason why your narrative is so important is you have to get the lender on your side. You're asking this lender to fork over potentially millions of dollars, up to $5 million with the SBA program, on the bet that you're going to be an amazing business owner over the next 10 years to pay them back the loan. And so when you're crafting this narrative, you're also putting in there your experience, what you plan on doing with this industry, and why you're the best person for the job. The SBA 7A loan program is an amazing program. What it does is the SBA is a government organization that stands for the Small Business Administration, and they provide a guarantee to lenders of normal banks that if you give this loan to Jack over here, we're going to back that loan with our guarantee so you can give him more leverage. So instead of just giving him 70% of the value of the business, give him up to 90, sometimes 95% of the value of the business in a loan, because we're going to cover your downside, because if Jack defaults on the loan, we're going to cover that extra 20% that you missed out on when you gave him that leverage. So this allows people that typically would not be able to get conventional financing, it allows them the opportunity to have a government-backed loan to go out and buy that business. Cool thing about the 7A loan program, it's very easy to qualify for. I've worked with hundreds, at this point, well over 700 people over the last few years, and not one of them has not qualified for an SBA 7A loan. Now, the difference between them is how much they qualify for. Some qualify for a few $100,000, and some qualify for the max of over $5 million. It all depends on what your personal financial situation looks like. With this loan program, you're able to go find a business that is cash flowing, has a 1.5 DSCR or higher, which means that there's 1.5 times more cash flow than there is debt when you're taking out the loan to buy this business. If you can find a business that meets that criteria, then the SBA 7A loan program can give you up to 90%, even higher, sometimes up to 95%, depending on the deal, of the loan, of the purchase price, so that you're going to be able to get this deal done with as little money out of your own pocket as possible. So in order to get qualified qualify for the SBA 7A loan program, you need to do a couple things. First off, get together your paperwork. And your paperwork means if you have a full-time job, you get the last few years of your W-2. Go back 3 years. Also, go get the last 3 years of your tax returns. Then you're going to fill out something called a PFS, a personal financial statement. In that personal financial statement, you're going to list all of your assets, all the things you have money in, and then all your liabilities, all the things you owe. And it's going to show you kind of a rough estimate of what your net worth is. Now, the bank's going to be able to look at that, and they're going to be able to tell you, okay, based on this, we feel comfortable knowing that we can give you up to $2 million, $1 million, $500,000, whatever it may be, but they're going to be able to tell you what they feel comfortable giving you for a deal that meets their criteria. Now, this is no guarantee that the bank is going to give you this money. They need to find a great deal. So at the end of the day, the deal is the most important thing. So for those of you out there who may be worrying that I don't have a lot of money, I don't have a lot of stock, I don't have a home that has equity in it, or whatever thing that you think you need, you don't necessarily need that. What you need is a good deal. If you find an amazing cash flowing deal, the bank is able to overlook sometimes a lot of your personal financial situation as long as they feel very solid about your experience and being able to run that business and make it better. Now, one of the most common questions I get is, well, how am I going to pay this loan? Like, I don't have $5,000 a month, $10,000 a month, or if you're taking on a $5 million loan, that could be tens of thousands of dollars a month. I get questions all the time about, well, I don't have the money to pay that. Well, you're not paying it yourself. The business is. When you buy that cash flowing business, part of your calculation, as I mentioned before, is something called the debt service coverage ratio. That means how much cash flow is coming in and how much debt is going out, and what is the difference between the two. And we want to see 1.5 times more cash flow than debt. So when you buy that cash flowing business that's been around for 20 plus years, that's been through recessions, it's been through cycles, and it's still standing, that business in the first month is going to pay you its profit, and out of that profit, you're going to take a piece to pay off your debt payment. So it is never coming out of your pocket, it is coming out of the business's pocket. Now, there are a bunch of different ways in order to get a deal done. Now, one of the simplest methods that most of my students use is kind of the trifecta approach. You're going to mix an SBA loan with seller financing and then bring either your own or, even more preferable, an investor to the deal to pay the down payment. A typical deal may look like this. 80% of the $1 million deal, which would be $800,000, is an SBA loan. 10% will be seller financing. That means at closing, that 10% is not coming out of anyone's pocket. That means after closing, that $100,000 you now owe to the seller, you'll start making payments on a payment plan towards the seller. And that leaves the remaining 10%, which is where you would bring in an investor with $100,000 to give towards the down payment to get the deal done. Now, that is typically the most common way these types of deals get done. But there's plenty of other students who've done 100% seller financing, 90% seller financing. There's other deals out there where they've bought into the business. So they bought 50 or 75% of the business, and the owner is still working the day-to-day, still doing everything, and the SBA still funds that type of acquisition. So there's no excuse, there's no limit to what you can do when you find a good deal. There are dozens of ways in which you can structure it to get it across the finish line. And we talked about what is business acquisition. Now let's jump into how do you find these deals. The most popular place that people like to get started, and this is where I recommend you go just to get your feet wet, is go to bizbuysell.com. Now, BizBuySell is by volume the most visited site when it comes to business acquisition. You go on there, and these are typically deals in which there is a business broker that represents the business, and he's listing this on this site for potential buyers. When you go on there, you're going to want to change your filters to match this. You want the business to be at least 5 years or older, because if it's less than 5 years, it's almost impossible to get financing for it. So we want it to be 5 years or older. We want it to have at least over a couple $100,000 in cash flow. Now, the reason for this is there's a lot of small deals on BizBuySell. Typically, the smaller the deal, the more risky it is. Now, that may seem counterintuitive because you might be asking, well, if it's a bigger deal, that means I'm taking out more loan, which is seemingly more risky. And the answer is it's actually not. The larger the business means the more revenue it brings in, the larger the team is, and typically the longer it's been around. So the larger the business almost always means it's a more stable business and a much less risky business to acquire. Another thing that you can be looking at when you're looking on BizBuySell is you're looking for businesses that fit the core 3 model. We want a business that is recession resistant. We want a business that has some component of recurring revenue, and we want a business that has some type of barrier to entry. If you can find a business that has all 3 of those, then that is a business that is prime for our business acquisition strategy. On top of searching on BizBuySell, another thing that we do and teach our students to do is off-market sourcing. As I mentioned before, on BizBuySell, you are just going to see brokered deals. So these are businesses that found a business broker to represent them to try to get to sell. But there are tons more businesses out there that are not currently on the market. And most of those business owners haven't even really thought about selling. So the way we do is we do cold email and cold calling. And we reach out to these businesses, letting them know that we're interested in potentially acquiring them. For the most part, you're going to get about a 7 to 10% response of the businesses that you send these messages to. Of that 7 or 10% that respond, about 10% of them will actually jump on a call to talk through what you may be interested in buying them for. Of that 10% that got on a call, another 10% of those will make it to the LOI stage or they get under contract. That might seem like it's a really small number, but when we're talking about cold email and cold calling, we're doing this in mass. We are sending out thousands of messages a month. Over a few thousand messages, you're going to potentially get a handful of deals that you can bring in and close as your first acquisition. Now, there's plenty of ways in which you can do business acquisition. One of those is the owner-operator strategy. Now, this is something that I am not doing. Owner-operator means you buy the business and you run it as yourself. You take over the role of the owner, you put in 40 plus hours a week to run it and continue on as the new business owner running the day-to-day. And that's fine. If you want to do that, that's much easier than our strategy. Our strategy is much more lucrative, as well as gives us much more time to do other things like be with our families and do the things that bring us joy. And the way we do this is we target businesses that have GMs already in place, so general managers, or the seller is willing to stay on to continue running the business. That might seem like a weird thing because you would think, aren't these people trying to retire? Why would they stay on and run the business? Well, when a seller is put forward a proposal that says, hey, I'm going to pay you $2 million for this business. Plus, if you stick around for 3 years, I'll pay you an extra $120,000 a year in salary to continue to run this business just as you did the day before we acquired it. And over those 3 years, you're going to train up someone who's going to replace you. So now you can retire 3 years later with another $360,000 in your pocket. And all you had to do was do the thing that you already know how to do for 3 more years. And that is actually a pretty compelling message. We get most sellers are open to the idea of sticking around for a period of time. And by taking a salary and still running the day-to-day, most of them will agree to this. Focusing on the strategy of having a GM or the former seller stick on as your general manager and running the business is what allows us to go out and buy multiple businesses and be able to create a cash flowing portfolio to make this into something that is truly generating generational wealth. Typically, the responsibilities that these general managers take care of is everything that has to do with the day-to-day service of that business. So whether your business makes a product or your business has a service, they're the ones managing the team, they're managing the quality of that service, and they're making sure that you are hitting all the KPIs and metrics that you put into their job description. What you focus on as the owner of this business is different ideas and strategies to grow the market share of this business. So while your GM is managing the day-to-day, commuting to work, making sure that everyone is showing up on time and doing a great service, you're thinking through different ways in which you can build revenue in this business, different marketing strategies, different partnerships that you can do with other local businesses in your area. Those are the things that you as the new owner are focusing on. And typically that only takes a few hours a week. Every one of my businesses is run by someone who has more experience than I do running that business. The goal here is to find the right people and put them in their own zone of genius to grow that business in the best way that they know how. This is exactly what I've done with the 6 businesses that I own, and I work on less than 15 hours a week. I want to emphasize that this is not a get-rich-quick scheme. The amount of work and time it takes of pure focus and relentless effort to get your first deal done is between 6 months, and for me, it was over 18 months. This is something that you need to put the effort and time and focus in order to get this across the finish line. Business acquisition is a marathon. It is not a sprint. This is something that many people are going to think is easy, and then they're going to get started in the process and realize that there are many steps and many different ways in which this process can fail. Now, if you stay the course and focus for the next 6 months, you can have a business that is cash flowing you over 6 figures a year. Or you can try to go off some other gimmicky ad that tells you that you're going to build a $10,000 a month business in the next 4 weeks. You can decide on which one sounds more realistic and has been around for centuries instead of the last 10 minutes on your timeline. Some examples of this with my students is Zach, who acquired an accounting firm for $2.5 million. His first year, he's going to cash flow over $1 million. And Zach's background is not even a CPA. He's a software engineer. And then you have Melissa, who's a school teacher from New Jersey, who acquired a commercial pool cleaning business in Myrtle Beach, and she's on track to do over $300,000 in cash flow in her first year of ownership of this business. For how low risk business acquisition is, it is crazy the types of returns that you can have if you do it correctly. If you want to learn more about this business, I'm going to be putting out a ton more content on this channel about how I've grown a cash flowing portfolio of boring businesses. And if you want to learn from me directly, you can check out the link in the description below. Thanks for tuning in. See you later.